The cellar was cold, so cold that Seraphine could feel the chill crawling beneath her skin, curling around her bones like tiny snakes of ice. The stone walls were rough and damp, seeping the smell of mold and forgotten water. Her hair clung to her face, and her hands were raw from dragging herself across the uneven floor. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, sharp and insistent. A constant reminder that her body was weakening. She had been trapped here for days or perhaps weeks. Time had lost meaning. She had once been a lady of the Dravalis estate, her days filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the gentle rustle of silk gowns. But betrayal had changed everything. Her own family, driven by fear of her mysterious affinity with shadows, had locked her away like a dangerous animal. They had whispered about curses and prophecies, about powers that should not exist in the bloodline of humans. They had told her she was nothing more than a threat to their legacy, and now, in the suffocating darkness, she realized that hope was her only weapon. Seraphine's mind worked feverishly. Escape was not just a desire, it was a necessity. Every night, she listened to the creaks of the old house above, noting the patterns of the guards' patrols, the rhythm of footsteps on stone stairs. Every night, she whispered to the shadows, feeling the strange warmth they offered. Though faint, a connection to something greater hummed through her veins, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. One evening, as the candlelight from above flickered and died, Seraphine tested the old lock on the cellar door. Her fingers were stiff, trembling, but she pressed, twisted, and felt the mechanism yield ever so slightly. A thrill of hope ran through her, sharp and dangerous. The shadows seemed to tighten around her, as if urging her on, whispering that she could survive if she only had the courage. The next few nights passed in careful, tense preparation. She sharpened a piece of broken wood to use as a tool, moved quietly to avoid the guard's attention, and memorized the layout of the estate above. And then, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and the house was silent, Seraphine made her move. The lock gave way with a faint click, and she pushed the door just enough to slip through. Her heart raced in her chest, hammering so loudly she feared it would betray her escape. She climbed the cold, winding stairs, every step a battle against the fear that her family's wrath would find her. Once she reached the main hall, she paused, listening. The house was quiet, as if holding its breath, and then she ran. Outside, the night air bit at her cheeks, and the forest beyond the estate seemed to welcome her like an old friend. She stumbled through underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes, but she did not care. She only cared about one thing: survival. The estate faded behind her, shrinking into darkness, while the vast unknown of the forest stretched ahead. But Seraphine knew that fleeing into the woods alone was not enough. Her family's reach extended far beyond these lands. She had heard stories, whispered in fear, of the Alpha King who ruled the northern territories. His name was enough to make even the bravest soldiers shiver. They said he was merciless, a ruler who commanded beasts of shadow and frost, whose presence could silence entire armies. Yet, in those stories, there was also a glimmer of hope. It was said that those who reached him and proved themselves could find protection and power unlike anything else in the world. Seraphine pressed onward, her feet sinking into the frost-touched earth as she climbed toward the northern mountains. Hunger clawed at her belly, fatigue threatened to pull her into sleep, and yet she pressed on. Every shadow around her seemed to flicker with movement, every whisper of the wind a warning. But she was no longer the fragile girl her family had tried to imprison. She was something more. She was the shadow that had protected her, the flame that had refused to die. Night after night, she journeyed. She crossed frozen rivers and jagged cliffs, avoiding the patrols of bandits and creatures that roamed the forest. She remembered the tales of the Alpha King's wolves, creatures so loyal to him that they were said to anticipate his every thought. The thought both terrified and comforted her. If she could reach him, perhaps she could find sanctuary. If she failed, the wilderness itself might claim her. One evening, just as the first stars began to pierce the dark velvet sky, Seraphine felt her body betray her. Weak from hunger and exhaustion, she stumbled on a patch of icy ground. Her vision blurred. Her limbs refused to respond fully, and she fell to her knees. Snowflakes settled on her hair and shoulders, cold and delicate against her fevered skin. She could no longer tell where the world ended, and her own fear began. And then she heard it, a low growl, distant but unmistakable. Her heart leapt, a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Through the mist and falling snow, shadowy shapes moved with deliberate, silent grace. Wolves. The stories were true. The Alpha King's domain was near. She had reached the border of the northern lands. But now, she realized, she was utterly exposed. Seraphine's strength faltered completely. She sank into the snow, the wind lashing at her face and freezing her tears. She felt the cold seep into her bones, and for the first time since her imprisonment, fear overcame determination. She could not move. The shadows around her seemed to hold their breath, waiting. And then a figure appeared, stepping through the mist like a phantom of legend. Towering, cloaked in fur and steel, his presence commanded the space around him. Even from this distance, Seraphine felt the weight of his gaze, sharp and piercing, yet not unkind. It was the Alpha King himself, or at least, someone as formidable as the stories had promised. The wolves halted at his signal, circling silently, eyes glinting like molten silver. Seraphine shivered, not entirely from cold. The stories had told her that he could be merciless to those who trespassed, that he punished intruders without hesitation. Yet, she sensed something more beneath the surface, a power tempered by experience, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She tried to speak, but her voice was lost to the wind, a fragile whisper that barely stirred the air. The figure approached, slow and deliberate, and knelt beside her. His eyes, cold yet searching, met hers. For a moment, neither moved, as if the world itself had paused to witness this meeting of two souls shaped by betrayal and survival. "You should not be here," he said, his voice deep, calm, and filled with authority. "The lands beyond are not kind to the weak." Seraphine tried to rise, but her body refused. Her hands sank into the snow, and she realized with bitter clarity that she could not continue on her own. She had escaped death in the cellar, only to face it anew at the edge of a kingdom ruled by a man who could crush her with a single thought. Yet even in her vulnerability, a spark of defiance remained. She would not beg, she would not plead. She had survived this long through her will alone, and she would continue to do so if only she could find the strength. The Alpha King studied her silently, and in that quiet, Seraphine felt something shift. He was not merely a judge of the strong or a master of beasts. He was a king who saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had. And though she could not yet understand why, she knew that meeting him had changed everything. For the first time since her captivity, she allowed herself a fragile hope. Perhaps she had not escaped only to die in the snow. Perhaps there was a reason her path had led her here, to the border of a kingdom both feared and revered. And yet, as the wind howled and the wolves watched silently, Seraphine knew one thing. Reaching him was only the beginning. She was no longer a prisoner of stone walls, but a player in a story far greater than herself, a story that could either save her or destroy her entirely. Cliffhanger. The Alpha King extended a hand, not in threat, but in challenge. Seraphine's pulse quickened. She realized, with a mix of fear and stubborn hope, that her life now rested entirely in his hands, and that stepping into his kingdom would demand everything she had left, including her shadowed secrets. The snow crunched under heavy boots, as Kale, the Alpha King, led Seraphine through the silent forest. The wolves moved around them like shadows, their eyes glinting in the cold moonlight. Seraphine tried to stand tall, but weakness clung to her, a reminder that the escape from the cellar had nearly cost her life. Her fingers were stiff, her breath shallow, but she refused to let fear show, not fully. Kale did not speak at first. His eyes, cold as winter steel, studied her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He had seen many wanderers at the border of his lands, most foolish enough to believe they could enter his kingdom unchallenged. Few survived. Few lived long enough to tell the story. But there was something in Seraphine that intrigued him, something beyond the frail body shivering before him. There was fire in her spirit, a shadow that whispered secrets only he could almost feel. "You are far from home," Cale said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "And yet you risked everything to reach these lands." "Why?" Seraphine looked up at him, the snow melting into tears on her cheeks. "I have no home left," she whispered. "Only the shadows follow me, and even they cannot protect me forever." Cale nodded once, as if understanding more than her words could say. "Then you will be tested," he said. "The North does not forgive weakness, and it does not shelter those who cannot endure its trials. You will remain under watch." He gestured to the wolves. They circled closer, protective yet tense. Seraphine swallowed her fear. She had faced betrayal, starvation, and darkness, but she had never faced someone like Cale. His presence was a weight on her chest, demanding acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps trust. The fortress loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette of black stone against the pale sky. Smoke rose from tall chimneys, curling into the winter air, carrying the faint scent of burning pine and iron. The walls were thick, ancient, and etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the cold. It was a place built not merely to defend, but to intimidate, to remind all who entered that power lived here, in every stone, every shadow. Seraphine shivered not from cold, but from awe. She had never imagined such a place. She had known fear in her family's halls. But Cale's fortress was different. It radiated authority, danger, and strange beauty all at once. Cale did not offer her a room of comfort. She was led to a small chamber near the inner courtyard, sparsely furnished with a single bed and a table. The walls were bare, save for a faint etching of a wolf in mid-leap, its eyes carved with uncanny realism. Seraphine sank to the bed, exhausted. For the first time since her imprisonment, she allowed herself a moment of rest, but sleep was slow to come. Haunted by memories of the cellar and the unknown trials that awaited her, days passed in a tense rhythm. Cale observed her from a distance, sometimes entering the room without warning, testing her reactions with questions, challenges, and silent scrutiny. He watched her attempt to regain her strength, her careful use of shadow magic to protect herself from the cold, and the way her eyes flared with defiance when she refused to bow completely to his authority. Seraphine, in turn, learned much about Cale. His silence was not cruelty but calculation. He ruled with precision, commanding the fortress and its inhabitants with a presence that brooked no disrespect. Yet beneath that, she sensed the weight of loss, the ghosts of betrayal, and the loneliness of power. He had built walls around his heart as high as the stone walls of his fortress, and for the first time, she wondered if he had ever truly trusted anyone. One evening, during a storm that battered the fortress with wind and snow, Cale approached Seraphine in the courtyard. Lightning flashed, illuminating his angular face and the sharp edges of his armor. The wolves gathered at his feet, silent and alert. Seraphine could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric. "You have survived far more than I expected," he said, his voice almost drowned by the howl of the wind. "Few would have made it through the forest alone. Yet you are here, in my domain. Tell me, what is your purpose?" Seraphine met his gaze, her shadow magic stirring faintly at her fingertips. "I seek survival," she said. "I seek freedom. And if it is within your power, protection from those who would see me dead." Cale studied her, the wind tossing his dark hair across his face. "Protection comes at a price," he said, his eyes narrowing. "And freedom. Freedom is earned, never given." Over the following weeks, Seraphine trained in secret, honing her shadow magic with Cale's subtle guidance. Though he often remained distant, he would watch her from the edge of the courtyard, his presence both oppressive and oddly comforting. There was a tension between them that neither could ignore. A fragile, dangerous connection that seemed to grow with each shared glance, each silent acknowledgement of the other's strength. Their moments were rare but electric. A brush of hands while passing in the hall, A shared glance across the courtyard, and the air would hum with unspoken questions. Neither spoke of it, yet both felt it, an undercurrent of emotion, stronger than fear, more powerful than desire, tempered by the knowledge that one wrong step could destroy them both. Then came the night of revelation. Seraphine had been wandering the fortress gardens, trying to stretch her legs after days of confinement. The snow had melted into slush, and the wind carried the scent of earth and stone. She paused near an ancient fountain, its water frozen into jagged crystals, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. A soft rustle behind her made her turn, shadow magic flaring instinctively. Kale stepped from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "You should not wander alone," he said, voice calm but commanding. Seraphine lowered her hands. "I am not afraid," she replied. Though her chest heaved with adrenaline, Kale's gaze softened. A fraction. Just enough to show that beneath his stern exterior, he felt something that mirrored her own uncertainty. "There is more to you than mere survival," he said. "The shadows you command, they speak to something buried deep within you, something connected to me." Her heart skipped a beat. "Connected? How?" she asked, though fear whispered that she did not want the answer. Kael stepped closer, the stormlight catching in his eyes. "Your magic. It resonates with a power I thought lost. A power tied to my bloodline, to the old curses of this land. If you do not learn to control it, it will destroy you. And perhaps me." Seraphine felt a shiver of both dread and fascination. She had survived so much, yet she realized that Kale's words were true. The shadows were not merely a tool, they were a force that could shape destinies, and her bond with them was deeper than she had ever imagined. As the wind howled around them, lightning illuminating the frozen garden, Kale reached out not to touch her, but to point at the jagged ice of the fountain. "See this?" he said. "Even the strongest ice can shatter if struck at its heart. Your shadows, they are that ice. And I am that strike." Seraphine swallowed, understanding the weight of his metaphor. Their fates were intertwined now, in ways she could neither control nor predict. They were allies, adversaries, and something more dangerous than either of them dared name. Before she could respond, a distant cry pierced the night, a sound not of wind or wolves, but of human voice, strained and urgent. The echoes bounced off the stone walls of the fortress and into their ears. Kale's eyes narrowed. "They have found you," he said grimly. "Those who hunted you, those who sought to end your life. They are closer than you think." Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. She had fled one danger only to find another. And now, the fragile connection she had begun to feel with Kale was tested by the shadow of her pursuers. The fortress, which had seemed a place of refuge, suddenly felt like the stage for a battle she might not survive. Kale extended a hand toward her, the gesture both protective and commanding. "Come with me," he said. "If we are to survive this, you must trust me fully. Only then will your shadows and you find strength." Seraphine looked into his eyes, searching for certainty, for kindness, for a reason to step forward. She found none, yet she also knew she had no choice. The snow beneath them, the storm above them, and the wolves circling silently, they all demanded a decision. Her hand hovered over his, trembling. Then, slowly, she took it. The instant their fingers touched, a pulse of energy surged through the air, subtle, electric, yet undeniable. Shadows twisted around her like living things, responding to the silent command of both their wills. The wind stilled for a heartbeat, and the fortress seemed to hold its breath. Seraphine realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that her journey had truly begun. She had escaped the cellar, crossed a kingdom's border, and now stood on the edge of something far greater than survival, something that could bind her fate to Kael's, whether she wanted it or not. Cliffhanger. The distant cry grew louder, closer, and unmistakable. The hunters were here. Seraphine's shadows flared in panic. Kael's wolves bristled, and both of them understood that the first true test of their bond, and of their survival, was about to begin. The wolves circled closer, ears pricked, teeth glinting in the dim light of the fortress courtyard. Seraphine's shadow magic writhed around her, responding to her fear and anger, flickering like living flames across the snow. Kale stood beside her, his presence steady, a pillar of strength she could cling to. Yet even his confidence did not erase the danger they faced. The hunters, her family's hired assassins, had crossed into the Alpha King's domain. They were ruthless, skilled, and unaware that the land itself would resist them. Seraphine clenched her fists, trying to focus her power. Every step she had taken, every trial she had survived, had led her to this moment. Her shadow magic pulsed in tandem with her heartbeat, responding to the tension in the air. The wolves growled softly, sensing the rising threat, while Kale's eyes narrowed, analyzing the terrain and calculating the odds. "You must trust me," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Let your fear become focus. Let your shadows guide you, not consume you." She nodded, drawing a deep breath. The memory of the cellar, the cold, the hunger, the isolation fueled her determination. She would not be broken again. Not by her family. Not by anyone. She was no longer a girl hiding in darkness. She was a force shaped by survival, shadows, and fire. The hunters appeared first as faint figures in the swirling snow. Their armor glinted, swords drawn, eyes cruel and certain. They believed Seraphine would be an easy target. They had underestimated the bond she shared with the land, with Kale, and with the wolves that moved as extensions of his will. Kale gave a subtle nod, and the wolves leapt into motion, a living storm of teeth, fur, and silent coordination. Seraphine felt her shadows surge in response, swirling around her like a protective cloak, solidifying into shapes that could strike, block, and confuse. Together, they were a force unlike anything the hunters had ever imagined. The first clash was swift and brutal. Shadows lashed at the intruders, tangling with their weapons, tripping their feet. The wolves moved with precision, cutting off escape routes and protecting Seraphine from every angle. Kale struck with power and elegance, his own combat style blending seamlessly with the natural world. The snow became a canvas of motion, magic, and raw strength, the air vibrating with tension and energy. In the midst of battle, Seraphine caught Kale's gaze. There was a wordless understanding passing between them, a recognition that survival depended not only on skill but on trust, on yielding to the connection that had grown between them. Her shadow magic became sharper, more controlled, as if he were the anchor she needed to wield it fully. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The hunters, skilled though they were, could not withstand the combined force of the Alpha King, the wolves, and Seraphine's growing mastery of shadows. One by one, they fell, retreating into the snow, defeated and humiliated. The courtyard grew silent once more, save for the wind and the soft panting of the wolves. Kale sheathed his sword and turned to Seraphine, studying her closely. Her face was streaked with dirt and frost, yet her eyes burned with triumph. He offered a rare, slight smile, the first she had seen from him that was unguarded by authority or caution. "You survived," he said simply. "Not because of me, but because you chose to stand, to fight, and to trust yourself." Seraphine exhaled, relief and pride mingling in her chest. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted, the words soft but sincere. "And without them." She nodded toward the wolves, who had already begun to settle around the edges of the courtyard. Kale's expression darkened briefly, a shadow passing over his face. "Do not mistake their obedience for loyalty," he said. "They serve me, but their bond to you is fragile. You must learn to command it yourself. Only then will you truly be safe." Over the following days, Kale guided her through training she had never imagined. She learned to merge her shadows with the natural world, to use them as extensions of herself rather than a separate force. The connection between them deepened, subtle and unspoken every shared glance, Every brush of hands during training, every quiet word spoken in the halls of the fortress, layered tension, curiosity, and the faintest hint of trust that could bloom into something far greater. Yet beneath the triumph and connection, questions lingered. Cale's demeanor, though softened, carried the weight of past betrayals. Seraphine's heart ached with the memory of her family's treachery. Both knew that redemption was not given lightly. It had to be earned, in actions and choices that revealed courage, loyalty, and the willingness to change. One evening, as the northern sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fortress in gold and shadow, Cale led Seraphine to the battlements. The wind whipped around them, icy and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Below, the kingdom stretched like a frozen tapestry, beautiful, yet dangerous. "You have changed," Cale said quietly. "Not just in power, but in spirit. The girl who stumbled across my lands is gone. You stand now as someone who can shape fate itself." Seraphine looked out over the expanse, feeling the truth of his words. She was no longer weak. She was no longer a victim. Her shadow magic pulsed gently around her, steady and calm, a reflection of the strength she had forged through trial and survival. "And you?" she asked softly. "Have you changed?" Cale's gaze met hers, dark and intense. "Perhaps," he said, "but some things, some truths, cannot be altered. I have seen too much. I have lost too much. You remind me, though, that even the strongest walls can be softened. Even the coldest hearts can feel warmth." The silence between them held a weight neither had expected. Words seemed unnecessary as they stood side by side, two broken souls whose paths had collided in fire, shadow, and frost. The fortress, the wolves, the battles all seemed to fade in the quiet understanding of shared survival. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Seraphine spoke. "I trust you." Spoke. "I trust you." Cale's hand brushed hers, a fleeting, electric touch that carried all the power and restraint of their journey together. In that moment, the world felt balanced, as if the trials of the past had led them here not by chance, but by design. Yet even in this fragile moment of connection, a new awareness stirred. Seraphine sensed a shadow within herself. Deeper than hunger or fear, a pulse of magic that had not yet been tamed. It was alive, responsive to emotion, and perhaps even capable of unforeseen power. Cale felt it too, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in fear but in anticipation. They both understood that while this battle was over, the story of their union, their growth, and their connection was only beginning. Night fell over the fortress, stars glimmering above like scattered jewels. The wind carried soft whispers, ancient and mysterious, through the battlements. Seraphine and Cale stood together, watching over a kingdom reborn from ice and shadow, knowing that trust, courage, and power had forged a bond that would endure beyond the trials they had faced. And yet, the shadows around Seraphine shifted, restless, as if hinting at a future still unwritten. The danger had passed, but destiny had not yet revealed its full design. Their journey, their redemption, and the depth of their connection were far from complete. Cliffhanger, emotional hook. Seraphine felt at first a subtle tremor in her shadow magic, a whisper of a force she could not yet understand. Cale sensed it too. They were united, powerful, and alive. But something was stirring beyond the horizon. The story of shadows, kings, and hearts that dared to trust one another was only beginning, and the next chapter promised challenges that would test not only their strength, but the love and loyalty that had blossomed between them.